"Don't hurt him, I'll buy him," she said. "Call him savage all you want. I see a man worth saving." The town was small, quiet, and slow-moving, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's habits long before they knew their real stories. Wooden houses stood close together along dusty roads, and mornings began with the sound of tools, trucks, and distant conversations. People watched everything that happened, and opinions formed quickly. In this town, labels mattered more than truth, and one man carried a label that followed him everywhere. They called him Savage. No one remembered exactly who started the name, but it stayed. Some said it was because of his rough beard and worn clothes. Others said it was because he never smiled much or joined gatherings. Children whispered when he walked past. Adults lowered their voices but stared just the same. He lived at the edge of town in a small cabin surrounded by trees, keeping to himself and working wherever he could find honest labor. His real name was Daniel, though few used it. Every morning, Daniel woke before sunrise. He worked hard fixing fences, repairing broken roofs, cutting firewood, or helping with heavy tasks that others avoided. He never asked for attention or praise. When people paid him, he simply nodded and left quietly. Some thought his silence meant anger. Others thought it meant pride, but no one truly asked him why he preferred silence over conversation. One cool morning, a new face appeared in town. Her name was Alina. She arrived in an old car filled with boxes, moving slowly down the main road while curious eyes followed her. Outsiders were rare here, and newcomers were studied carefully. Alina stepped out of her car near a small rental house, looking around with calm curiosity rather than fear. She greeted neighbors with a warm smile, which surprised many who expected hesitation. Within hours, she began hearing about Daniel. "Stay away from him," one shopkeeper warned. "He's trouble." Another person added, "He doesn't belong with normal people." Alina listened but did not respond. She had learned long ago that stories told by crowds were not always true. She believed in seeing people for herself. Later that day, she saw him for the first time. Daniel stood near a broken fence outside a farm, quietly working while the owner watched from a distance. His movements were careful and skilled, hands steady despite years of hard labor. He said nothing, focusing only on the task. Alina noticed how animals nearby did not fear him. A dog lay calmly beside him, and birds continued to move around without alarm. He looked nothing like the dangerous figure people described. He looked tired. Days passed, and Alina continued observing the town. She noticed small details others ignored. A broken bench outside a store was suddenly repaired overnight. A lost animal returned home with a new collar. A widow's roof stopped leaking after a storm, though she said no one charged her for the work. Each time she heard whispers that Daniel had helped, but no one thanked him openly. Instead, people kept their distance. One afternoon, tension filled the town square. A group of men argued loudly near the market, and Daniel stood nearby holding a small bag of supplies. One man stepped forward, accusing him of something unclear. Old rumors mixed with anger. Voices grew louder. Some watched with interest, others stayed silent. Daniel did not fight back. He simply stood still, eyes lowered, as if he had learned long ago that defending himself with words rarely changed anything. The situation became uncomfortable. The crowd felt ready to turn against him without needing proof. That was when Alina stepped forward. Her voice was calm but firm. "That's enough," she said. The crowd fell quiet, surprised by her interruption. She walked closer, standing beside Daniel rather than in front of him. Her presence alone changed the energy of the moment. "If someone has a real problem," she continued, "then speak clearly, but don't attack a man just because of stories." People exchanged looks. Some laughed nervously, others frowned. "You don't know him," someone said. Alina replied gently, "Maybe. But I know what it looks like when someone is judged without being heard." Daniel glanced at her, confusion crossing his face. No one had stood beside him like that before. He was used to isolation, not support. The argument slowly faded, not because everyone agreed, but because her calm confidence removed the excitement of confrontation. One by one, people returned to their business, leaving Daniel and Alina alone. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Daniel nodded slightly. "You didn't need to do that," he said quietly. Alina shrugged. "Maybe not, but it felt right." He seemed unsure how to respond. Gratitude was unfamiliar territory for him, especially when offered without expectation. Over the following days, their paths crossed more often. Alina asked simple questions. about tools, about local work, about the weather, never pushing too deeply. Daniel answered briefly, slowly becoming more comfortable with conversation. She noticed how careful he was with words, as if he weighed each sentence before speaking. Rumors continued around them. Some people warned Alina that she was making a mistake. Others watched with curiosity, waiting for something dramatic to happen, but nothing dramatic happened. Instead, small moments built trust, sharing coffee outside a workshop, fixing a broken chair together, quiet conversations at sunset. Alina began to understand that Daniel's silence came from years of disappointment rather than anger. He had learned that people often decided who he was before he had the chance to show them otherwise. One evening, while watching the sky change colors, she said gently, "They call you Savage." He nodded once. "That's not your name," she added. "No," he said. "Then why accept it?" Daniel thought for a long moment. "Fighting every word people say gets tiring," he answered softly. Alina looked at him carefully. She saw strength hidden under exhaustion, kindness hidden under caution. She realized that the hardest battles were often the ones no one else could see. From that moment, she made a quiet decision. She would not change him. She would simply see him, truly see him, and let that be enough. The town watched closely as their connection grew, unsure whether to expect trouble or transformation. Some predicted failure, others secretly hoped for change. And Daniel, the man everyone called Savage, felt something unfamiliar beginning to grow, not loud or overwhelming, but steady and warm. Hope. Days slowly turned into weeks, and the small town began to notice a quiet change. It was not loud or dramatic, but something felt different whenever Alina and Daniel were seen walking together or working side by side. People still whispered, but their curiosity began to replace their fear. Daniel continued his daily routine. He woke early, worked hard, and spoke little. But now there were moments when he paused longer than before, moments when he listened instead of simply nodding and leaving. Alina's presence seemed to soften the space around him. She never pushed him to change. She simply treated him like any other person, and that alone began to shift how he carried himself. One morning, Alina visited the local market. Vendors greeted her warmly, but their smiles faded slightly when Daniel approached from the opposite direction. He stopped at a distance, clearly unsure whether to continue forward. Alina noticed this and walked toward him instead. "Good morning," she said naturally, as if nothing unusual was happening. Daniel gave a small nod. "Morning." The silence between them was comfortable, but the people watching made it feel heavier. Alina started talking about simple things: a broken chair she wanted to repair, a small garden she planned to build behind her house. Daniel listened carefully, occasionally offering quiet suggestions. Slowly, the tension around them faded. Some people turned away, disappointed that no argument or trouble appeared. Later that day, Daniel helped her carry wooden boards to her backyard. He worked with steady focus, measuring carefully and fixing each piece with skill. Alina noticed how precise he was, how he treated every task as if it mattered deeply. "You're good at this," she said. He shrugged. "Work is simple, people are harder." She smiled gently at his honesty. As they worked, Alina learned more about him through small details rather than long conversations. She saw how he avoided looking directly at crowds, how he paused before entering busy spaces, and how he always chose the quietest path when walking through town. These were not signs of danger. They were signs of someone who had learned to protect himself from constant judgment. One evening, rain began unexpectedly while Daniel was fixing a roof outside town. Alina drove past and saw him still working under the heavy clouds. Without hesitation, she stopped and offered him a ride back. At first, he refused politely, but when the rain grew stronger, he accepted. Inside the car, the sound of rain filled the silence. For a while, neither spoke. Then Alina asked softly, "Do you always work alone?" Daniel stared out the window. "Mostly. Do you prefer it that way?" He hesitated. "It's easier." She understood what he meant. Working alone meant fewer chances for rejection or misunderstanding. As time passed, Alina began noticing acts of kindness that Daniel never mentioned himself. He repaired a fence for an elderly neighbor without charging money. He returned a lost tool to a farmer who had once insulted him publicly. He left extra firewood outside a house during a cold night without revealing who had done it. Each action showed a different side of him, a quiet generosity hidden beneath years of silence. But not everyone welcomed this change. A few people in town grew uncomfortable seeing Alina beside him. They believed she was naive, that she would eventually regret trusting someone they had already judged. One afternoon, a group of locals approached her while she was buying supplies. "You don't know his history," one woman warned. Alina remained calm. "Then maybe you should tell me the truth, not rumors." The woman hesitated. "People say he caused problems before. He doesn't fit here." Alina nodded thoughtfully but did not argue. Instead, she said gently, "Sometimes people don't fit because no one makes space for them." Her words stayed with those who heard them. Meanwhile, Daniel began to feel something unfamiliar, a reminder of belonging. It frightened him as much as it comforted him. For years, he had accepted isolation as a fact of life. Now someone saw him differently, and he did not know how to respond. He worried that trusting again might lead to disappointment. One evening, while sitting outside Alina's house after finishing another project, he spoke more openly than before. "People always think they know who you are," he said quietly. "After a while, you stop trying to change their minds." Alina listened carefully. "And what do you think about yourself?" He did not answer immediately. The question seemed heavier than expected. Finally, he said, "I think I made mistakes, but not the ones they believe." Alina did not push him to explain further. She simply nodded, showing she was ready to listen whenever he felt prepared. As their connection deepened, small changes appeared in Daniel's behavior. He began greeting people first, even if they did not always respond warmly. He stayed longer in conversations instead of leaving quickly. Some townspeople noticed and started questioning their own assumptions. A turning moment came when a young boy fell from his bicycle near the main road. Daniel was the first to reach him, carefully helping him stand and checking that he was safe. The child's mother arrived, expecting fear or discomfort, but instead saw patience and kindness in Daniel's actions. She thanked him sincerely, and for a brief moment the label savage felt weaker. Alina watched these moments quietly. She understood that change did not happen through speeches or dramatic events. It happened through consistent actions that slowly reshaped how others saw someone. Still, not everyone was ready to let go of old beliefs. Late one afternoon, an unfamiliar vehicle entered town, stirring tension among those who recognized it. The arrival brought whispers of past events connected to Daniel, and the atmosphere shifted again. Alina noticed the change immediately. Daniel grew quieter, more distant, as if old shadows had returned. She sensed that something from his past was approaching, something that might test everything they had built so far. Standing beside him as the sun began to set, she said softly, "Whatever comes, you don't have to face it alone." Daniel looked at her, uncertainty and gratitude mixed in his eyes. He was not used to hearing those words. For the first time in years, he felt both hope and fear at the same time. Hope that someone believed in him, and fear that the past might take that away. The vehicle that entered the town did not look special, but the reaction it caused was immediate. A few older residents recognized it and began whispering before the engine even turned off. Dust settled slowly around the tires as the driver stepped out. He was a tall man in a clean jacket, holding a folder under his arm. His eyes moved across the town like he was searching for someone. Daniel had already seen him. His shoulders stiffened, and the small calm he had been building over the past week seemed to shrink. Alina noticed the change in him right away. The way he stood, the way his hands tightened slightly, it was not fear exactly, but something close to old pain. "Do you know him?" she asked quietly. Daniel nodded once. "From before." Before. That single word carried years inside it. The man from the vehicle walked toward the center of town where a few people had gathered. He spoke politely, but his voice carried enough to be heard by others. He asked where Daniel was. Some pointed without hesitation. Others stayed silent. Alina stayed beside Daniel as the man approached. "Daniel," the visitor said, stopping a few steps away, "I didn't expect to find you here." Daniel did not respond immediately. He simply looked at him calmly. The town's eyes were watching again. Old tension returned like a storm cloud that had only been hiding. The visitor introduced himself as Mr. Carter. He explained that he had come regarding an issue from years ago. He spoke about an old workplace, a misunderstanding, a report that had damaged Daniel's name in another town. As he talked, bits of information floated through the crowd, half understood, half assumed. Some people began whispering again. "So it's true," someone muttered. Alina listened carefully. She noticed something important. Mr. Carter never accused Daniel of doing harm. Instead, he kept saying words like incident, complaint, and unfinished record. It sounded less like a crime and more like a story that had never been fully told. Daniel finally spoke. "I thought that was closed." "It wasn't cleared," Mr. Carter replied. "There are still questions." The word questions was enough for some people to jump to conclusions. Alina stepped slightly forward, not aggressively, but with quiet strength. "Then maybe it's time for answers," she said calmly. Mr. Carter looked at her, surprised by her confidence. "And you are?" "A friend," she replied simply. The word friend felt powerful in that moment. It hung in the air, stronger than any rumor. Daniel glanced at her, unsure whether he deserved that title. Mr. Carter explained that years ago, at a factory job in another town, equipment had been damaged during a late shift. Daniel had been present. Another worker had blamed him. The management had accepted the story quickly, and Daniel had left before he could defend himself properly. The record followed him, even if it was never fully proven. Some in the crowd nodded as if this confirmed their worst assumptions, but Alina noticed something else. Daniel's expression was not defensive. It was tired, like someone who had told the truth before but had not been believed. "Why now?" Daniel asked quietly. "Because the company is reviewing old cases," Mr. Carter replied. There were new statements from former workers. "Your name came up again." The crowd grew more silent. Alina turned slightly toward Daniel. "Is there more to the story?" He hesitated. For years he had chosen silence over explanation. Silence had felt safer. But now, with eyes watching and Alina standing beside him, he faced a decision. Continue accepting a false image or finally speak. "I didn't break anything," he said slowly. "The machine was already failing. I warned the supervisor days before. But I was new and the other worker had been there longer. They believed him." His voice was steady, but the weight behind it was clear. Mr. Carter opened his folder. "That matches what two former employees recently said. They admitted the machine had issues before that night." Murmurs spread through the crowd. The story they thought they knew began to crack. Daniel continued, speaking more than he had in years. "After that, no one wanted to hire me. Word spreads fast. I stopped trying to explain. It didn't matter." Alina felt both sadness and pride. Sadness for what he had carried alone. Pride that he was finally speaking for himself. Mr. Carter closed the folder. "The company wants to clear the record officially. It may not change the past, but it will remove the report from your file." The silence that followed was different from before. It was not filled with suspicion. It was filled with reflection. One of the older men in town stepped forward. "So he wasn't guilty of anything?" Mr. Carter shook his head. "No confirmed wrongdoing." The simple statement hit harder than any dramatic speech. The label that had followed Daniel for years suddenly looked weak and careless. Alina looked around at the crowd. She did not say, "I told you so." She did not blame anyone. She simply stood there, calm and steady. Daniel felt something shift inside him. For so long, he had believed that speaking would change nothing. But today, the truth had finally been heard. Still, not everyone looked convinced. Some avoided eye contact, uncomfortable with how quickly they had judged him. Others seemed unsure how to respond. Later that evening, as the crowd dispersed, a few people approached Daniel quietly. They did not offer long apologies, just small words. "I didn't know. Maybe we were wrong." These were not grand gestures, but they were steps. Daniel and Alina walked away from the square together. The sun was lowering, casting long shadows across the road. "You didn't have to stay," Daniel said after a while. "Yes, I did," Alina replied softly, "because you would have stood alone otherwise." He stopped walking and looked at her. "Why?" It was a simple question, but it held deep meaning. "Because everyone deserves someone who listens before judging," she answered. He nodded slowly. The weight he had carried for years felt lighter but not gone. Clearing a record did not erase the loneliness he had experienced. Trust would take time. The next morning, something unusual happened. A shopkeeper who had always kept distance greeted Daniel first. A farmer asked if he was available for work next week. A mother allowed her child to wave at him without pulling him away. Change was not loud, but it was visible. Yet inside Daniel, another battle continued. Clearing his name was one thing. Believing in his own worth was another. Years of isolation had built walls that could not fall overnight. That evening, sitting outside his cabin, he spoke honestly to Alina. "I got used to being alone," he admitted. "It's strange now." "Strange can be good," she replied. What if it doesn't last? Elena looked at him carefully. Then we handle it together. Her words did not promise a perfect future. They promised partnership. For the first time, Daniel allowed himself to imagine something beyond survival, a life with connection, respect, maybe even belonging. But deep inside, he knew that the hardest part was not convincing the town. It was learning to forgive himself for accepting a false label for so long. The days after Daniel's name was cleared felt different, but not simple. The air in town carried a quiet awareness, as if everyone had realized something important but did not yet know how to talk about it. People were more polite, some were warmer, but Daniel could still feel the distance in certain looks. Trust once broken does not rebuild overnight. Elena noticed that although the town's attitude had shifted, Daniel remained cautious. He accepted greetings, nodded at kind words, and continued working hard, but a part of him still expected everything to fall apart. Years of being misunderstood had trained him to prepare for disappointment. One afternoon, the sky turned dark without warning. Heavy clouds rolled over the hills, and strong winds began to move through the streets. It was the kind of sudden storm that small towns feared, especially during harvest season. Market stands were still open, and several children were playing near the square. Within minutes, rain began pouring down. The wind grew stronger, pushing loose signs and knocking over light structures. People rushed to gather their belongings and run for shelter. Elena had been inside the local store when she heard shouting. She stepped outside and saw that part of an old wooden shelter near the square had begun to lean dangerously. Two young children were still beneath it, frozen in fear as the wind pushed harder against the weak frame. Before anyone else moved, Daniel ran forward. He did not hesitate. He did not look around to see who was watching. He moved quickly through the heavy rain, reaching the shelter just as one side cracked loudly. He lifted one of the children into his arms and pulled the other close, guiding them away from the unstable structure. The wind pushed harder, and the wooden beams shifted again. For a moment, Daniel struggled to keep his balance, shielding the children with his body as debris scattered around them. Then two other men rushed forward to help, finally reacting to what they were seeing. Together, they moved the children to safety. The shelter collapsed seconds later, crashing loudly onto the wet ground. Silence followed, broken only by the sound of rain and heavy breathing. The children were safe, frightened but safe. Elena hurried toward them, relief washing over her face. The children's parents arrived, holding them tightly. One of the mothers looked at Daniel with wide eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking. Daniel simply nodded, rain running down his face. He looked almost uncomfortable with the attention. But this time, the attention felt different. People were not staring in fear. They were staring in realization. The man they had once called savage had acted without thinking of himself. He had not waited for approval. He had not calculated how others would judge him. He had simply done what needed to be done. As the storm continued, Daniel moved through the square, helping secure loose boards and lift fallen items. Others followed his lead. For the first time, he was not working alone. People asked him what to do, and he gave simple instructions with calm confidence. Elena watched from a short distance, pride shining in her eyes. She knew this moment was not about proving anything. It was about showing who he had always been. When the storm finally passed and the clouds began to break, the town square looked messy but safe. No one was seriously hurt. People stood together, tired but grateful. The mayor approached Daniel slowly. "I owe you more than a thank you," he said honestly. "Today you protected our children." Daniel shifted slightly, unsure how to respond. "Anyone would have done the same." The mayor shook his head. "Not everyone moved first." The words settled deeply into the hearts of those standing nearby. Later that evening, as people cleaned up the remaining damage, conversations changed. Instead of repeating old rumors, they talked about what they had seen with their own eyes. The label that had followed Daniel for years now felt unfair, almost embarrassing. One older man approached him quietly. "I judged you," he admitted. "I didn't know the full story. I'm sorry." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Part of him wanted to say that apologies came too late. Another part of him felt tired of holding on to old hurt. "It's all right," he replied simply, and for the first time he meant it. That night, Elena and Daniel sat outside her house, watching the sky clear. The air smelled fresh after the storm, and the town felt calmer than it had in a long time. "You didn't think," Elena said softly. "You just acted." Daniel looked at his hands. They were just kids. She smiled gently. That's who you are, you help. He was quiet for a while. Do you think they'll really change? He asked. Alina considered the question carefully. Some already have, others will take time. But today they saw something real. They saw you. Daniel felt a mix of emotions, relief, disbelief, and something new that felt almost like peace. For years, he had tried to disappear, to survive quietly without causing trouble. He had believed that staying invisible was safer than being seen, but today proved something important. Being seen was not always dangerous. Sometimes it was necessary. The next morning, something unexpected happened. A group of townspeople gathered near his cabin. Daniel stepped outside cautiously, unsure what to expect. Instead of confrontation, he found gratitude. They brought tools to help repair minor storm damage around his property. It was a small gesture, but it carried meaning. "We figured you shouldn't be the only one helping," someone said with an awkward smile. Daniel looked at them, surprised. Work began quietly. No dramatic speeches, no loud celebrations, just people working side by side. Alina stood nearby, watching as the walls between Daniel and the town slowly lowered. It was not perfect. There were still moments of hesitation, still old habits that would take time to fade, but something had shifted deeply. Daniel felt it too. The weight of years of misunderstanding did not vanish completely, but it felt lighter. He no longer walked through town expecting rejection at every turn. He still moved carefully, but his steps carried more confidence. That evening, as the sun set over the hills, children played in the square again. One of the boys he had saved waved at him openly. "Hi, Daniel," the child called, not savage. Daniel raised his hand and waved back. Alina stood beside him, her heart full. She had seen the man worth saving from the beginning. Now others were finally seeing him too, but the greatest change was not in the town. It was inside Daniel. For the first time in years, he did not feel like he was standing outside the world looking in. He felt like he belonged, not because he had forced acceptance, but because he had remained true to who he was despite everything. Morning light slowly spread across the town, touching rooftops and quiet streets that now felt different from the past. Change had come gradually, almost unnoticed at first, but now it was clear to anyone paying attention. People greeted Daniel by name. Conversations felt more natural. The heavy silence that once followed him had softened into something warmer. Daniel still woke early, just as he always had. Old habits stayed with him, but his mornings no longer felt lonely. Instead of rushing through town with his head lowered, he walked with calm awareness, occasionally stopping when someone spoke to him. Each interaction felt small but meaningful, like pieces of a new life forming slowly. Alina watched these changes with quiet satisfaction. She never tried to take credit. She knew that Daniel's strength had always been there. All she had done was give him space to be seen. One day, the mayor approached Daniel with a simple request. The storm had revealed weaknesses in several structures around town, and they needed someone experienced to help guide repairs. Instead of asking him only as a worker, the mayor asked him as someone they trusted to lead. Daniel hesitated. Leadership was unfamiliar territory. For years, he had kept to the background, avoiding attention, but Alina's encouraging glance gave him confidence. "I'll help," he said finally. Work began the next morning. Daniel organized small teams, showing patience as he explained what needed to be done. People listened carefully, respecting his knowledge. Some even asked questions, something that would have been unthinkable months earlier. As they worked together, conversations grew easier. Jokes were shared, stories exchanged. The walls that once separated him from the town slowly disappeared. One afternoon, an older woman approached him while he rested near the square. "I owe you something," she said gently. Daniel looked confused. "I was one of the people who believed the rumors," she continued. "I told others to stay away from you. I regret that." Daniel listened quietly. Her honesty felt sincere. "We all make mistakes," he replied calmly. "What matters is what we do now." Her eyes softened with relief. She thanked him and walked away, leaving Daniel with a strange but comforting feeling. Forgiveness did not weaken him. It freed him. Meanwhile, Alina continued building her own life in town. She started helping at a small community center, organizing events that encouraged people to come together. One evening, she planned a simple gathering to celebrate the town's recovery after the storm. Lanterns hung from trees, and long tables were set with homemade food. Daniel felt unsure about attending. Large gatherings still made him nervous. But when he arrived and saw familiar faces smiling rather than staring, something inside him relaxed. Music played softly. Children laughed. Conversations flowed naturally. At one point, the mayor raised a glass and thanked everyone who had helped rebuild after the storm. He spoke about teamwork and courage, then paused. "And we must also thank someone who reminded us not to judge too quickly," he added, looking toward Daniel. The crowd turned toward him, not with pressure but with respect. Applause began, gentle at first, then stronger. Daniel felt overwhelmed but not uncomfortable. For the first time, attention felt like acceptance rather than suspicion. Later that evening, he stood beside Alina near the edge of the gathering, watching people enjoy themselves. "You changed this place," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No, people change when they are ready. You showed them who you really are," he thought about her words. Maybe she was right. Maybe all he had done was stop hiding. As weeks passed, Daniel noticed deeper changes within himself. He spoke more freely. He laughed sometimes, surprising even himself. He allowed people to help him instead of always carrying everything alone. The name Savage faded completely, replaced by genuine connection. One morning, a young boy approached him holding a small wooden carving. "I made this," the boy said proudly. "You helped me learn." Daniel looked at the carving, a small house, carefully shaped but imperfect. It reminded him of his own journey, strong but shaped by experience. "It's good," he said warmly. The boy smiled widely and ran back to his family. Moments like this felt more meaningful than any apology or recognition. They showed that the future was no longer built on old labels, but on real relationships. One evening, Daniel and Alina walked toward the hill overlooking the town. The sun painted the sky with soft colors, and a gentle breeze moved through the grass. "Do you ever regret staying here?" he asked. Alina smiled. "No, I came here looking for something real, and I found it." He nodded slowly. "For a long time," he said, "I believed I was exactly what people said about me. It felt easier to accept it than fight it." She looked at him carefully. "And now? Now I know that one person seeing you clearly can change everything." They stood in silence for a while, watching lights begin to glow in the houses below. The town was not perfect. There were still disagreements, still misunderstandings. But it had learned something important, that people are more than the stories told about them. Daniel's life did not transform into something unreal or dramatic. He still worked hard every day. He still preferred quiet moments. But he no longer carried the heavy weight of being unseen. The greatest change was simple. He felt valued. As months passed, new people moved into town, unaware of the old rumors that had once defined him. To them, Daniel was simply a skilled worker, a kind neighbor, someone reliable. The past no longer controlled his future. One afternoon, while repairing a bench in the square, he paused and looked around. Children played nearby. People greeted each other warmly. Alina laughed with a group at the community center. A sense of peace settled over him. He realized that being saved did not mean someone rescued him from life. It meant someone reminded him of his own strength when he had forgotten it. The woman who once said, "Don't hurt him, I see a man worth saving," had not changed who he was. She had simply believed in him long enough for him to believe in himself. And in that belief, Daniel found something more powerful than acceptance. He found belonging. The story did not end with a dramatic moment or a perfect future. It ended with quiet growth, steady trust, and a community that had learned to see beyond labels.